Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is the second part of our series where we're trying to bring to you a deeper understanding of the realm of spiritual economy and how leading individualities throughout history have taken up the inspiration and the impulses that arise by having the vehicles, the purified vehicles of Christ entering into human evolution so that they can serve as a template, as an archetypal form in which mankind can be led into higher levels of development and understanding. And so what's so interesting about this is that Rudolf Steiner gives this to you, and it's almost as if he's positing a challenge because he gives you a whole list of people that we're going to be sharing some of them. And it begs the question, okay, so this person is receiving inspiration as a result of the incarnation of a perfected vehicle through spiritual economy or overlighting them, or there's various ways in which this can manifest. But to be able to go to the written materials of these great saints and prophetic figures throughout history and leading individualities, and to be able to look at their work and try and discriminate which parts are more representative of that type of an impulse. And so that's really what makes it far more interesting when you begin to study some of these great individuals like Johannes Tauler or Meister Eckhart or St. Thomas Aquinas or, you know, Elizabeth of Hungary. There's really a long, long list of people, and they all are receiving different templates, so to speak, that arose as a result of the mystery of Golgotha and the incarnation of Christ at the turning point of time that occurred at the baptism by John in the Jordan River, so that the Son Spirit of Christ entered into the human body as the highest being that's ever entered directly into Earth evolution since the beginning of Earth evolution. And so that's kind of what we're going to be approaching in this second part regarding the perfected bodies of Jesus Christ and the realm of spiritual economy.
Yes, John, like we often do, we try to get into deeper secrets and also say what we forgot to say the first time. So this is the second of two videos, and as we do this, I want to make sure that I mention that in the first video and in this book that John just mentioned, you can find these 7 deeds of Christ that really shows you that we have here the Alpha and the Omega. We have the past, the present, and the future. Christ said that he would never leave us until the heaven and earth was no more, and to the end of time. And so what we have here is a commitment, but most people don't understand what is Christ doing now, and so they think, where's the second coming? Well, the second coming has been available to anyone who could perceive it in the etheric since about 1933. And even before that, St. Paul, when he saw Christ in the etheric on the road to Damascus, he actually first encountered this angel, as it were, who Steiner calls the Nathan soul, and we've called the Adam Kadmon, or you could call it the spiritual template of the human being, who had at different times worked as an angel, archangel, or archai, along with Christ, to bring the deeds of standing upright, speaking, and thinking to the human being. So in the book, it's impossible to say that you're going to reach this realm of spiritual economy and see these bodies or interact with these perfected vehicles of Christ and or other saints and heroes, Tolkus and many other different names for them, until you have in fact realized that who Christ is. Until that happens, then you don't realize that you're on that ocean that's being, you're in a boat in an ocean being raised by Christ, and you've ignored the ocean. So that's what we're trying to do today. And so we went over those 7 points. They're in the book, so you can have them. The 3 pre-earthly deeds of Christ, the 4th deed of Christ, the mystery of Golgotha. The 5th deed of Christ is Christ in the etheric, and that is the realm of spiritual economy. And that's what we're going to talk about more specifically. How does that play out? How does that happen? Do the people involved know that it's happening, or so on and so forth? I think there's a lot to say there, but we also have to remember that in the deed of Christ and the etheric also brings the memory of humanity, the memory, your memory, the memory of everyone. And this memory, Steiner describes that if you have a really great human being, after they die, their etheric body, their memory body doesn't die. They go out into the higher realms and they leave it in the super-etheric realm. And they take it on themselves sometimes when they come back. And this also explains why certain people have certain capacities from birth, because they've taken on something that they've perfected before. So also the 6th and the 7th are things that are never talked about in anthroposophy, though Rudolf Steiner does make reference to them. The 6th and the 7th deeds of Christ are to redeem the human astral body and to redeem the human I am. But if we're going to talk about this amazing reality, and I could never understand it, though I had, as someone who had studied religion, looked at the works of a lot of these people that Steiner said had this connection, this inspiration, this connection to the realm of spiritual economy with a perfected vehicle of Christ or otherwise, others. And I couldn't quite understand how these few people had the power to shape history and shape philosophy and shape what we thought about Christianity and to shape Christianity itself, until I understood. And then that's when I got the inspiration that, oh, I have to do this for people. I have to put this in the list, because you can only find this in a few places in Steiner. And when you do, it's so dense that it's very hard to get through. But when you put it on a list, you go, oh, yeah, that's the list that you would find to be the real Christians in the past, who each one of them took the next step of Christianity to spread Christianity. So the big question in studying this is, how did Christianity spread so fast? How did it have such a power? And so there are these different ages that Steiner says are ages when Christ worked first through the disciples and the apostles and through those who knew him, and then those who knew them, what we would call a word of mouth lineage. And so, as we know, a lot of the Gospels and many of the things that were written weren't written until hundreds of years after they died. So how did that happen? How could they believe that they were carrying on that literal of a tradition, that they could write this book in the name of someone else? Well, that is the beauty of the past, in that people did take on the entire mantle. Wasn't it Elijah to Elijah gave his mantle? This mantle means to take on the work of the other person. And I believe I've taken on the mantle of some of my teachers, and I know John has. So when you take on this mantle, it's a memory body. That's the reason I can tell these stories. So I'm going to tell you a story. And one of these stories is about one of my great teachers, considered one of the greatest teachers in anthroposophy, one of the greatest science teachers in anthroposophy. And in my second year of training, I wrote a teacher training article saying that, and just referring to something I thought everybody knew, that, that the pre-earthly deeds of Christ meant that in education, we needed to look at the deeds of writing, reading, and mathematics as the 3 earthly deeds of Christ, returning as higher capacities in the child. And you can see that. And that's why Steiner said, teach reading, writing first. So it goes writing, reading, which is, writing is like standing upright. It's like getting your awareness in a place. And so writing and reading is speech, and it's speech. And what is mathematics? Mathematics is a thinking. It's a thing. Some students never attain abstract thinking, and many children who have a slower development may not attain mathematical thinking, abstract thinking. So I put in this paper that something I thought about this thing, thinking that, of course, he's my teacher. He knows this, and he gives me an F. First F I ever got in my life, okay? I didn't take kindly to that. So I went to his boss and said, look at this. And he read the paper and he goes, well, I said, what grade would you give me, Werner? I don't care about the F because I don't care about grades. What grade did you give me? He goes, I'd give you an A+. I said, well, why doesn't this teacher know this? He goes, he must not have read that one lecture. I'm going, the whole principle of Waldorf education is based upon that one lecture, and he didn't read it, and he's teaching at a teacher training institute. Yes. If you don't read the exact lecture of Steiner, and what we're revealing here comes from just a couple places, and then you might not understand what he's saying because of the way that it's presented. So we're gonna kind of talk a little bit about that. But before I do, I want to say that in the Tibetan tradition, there's a thing called the Tolku. Now, the Tolku is a Tolku of a Buddha. Most of these Buddhas live in the spiritual world. They never lived on the earth. But you have all kinds of beings who say they are that Buddha incarnated, that they are the Tolku of that being incarnated. And you go, And then you find out there's 5 right now alive Tolkus of the Maitreya Buddha. And you go, well, how does that work? It's because in the realm of spiritual economy, that perfected vehicle, it's like in, only thing I can think of is the way that plasma works. There's a plasma ball, and as many plasma balls can come out of there as it wants, and it doesn't change that plasma ball. It's like an archetype. Steiner calls plasma the archetype. So you have this archetype. It doesn't change, but it can give archetypes to 1,000 different beings at once. And so that's the key to the realm of spiritual economy. It can replicate itself infinitely and seem completely personal to the individual who's inspired by it. So I have met, I think, 3 or 5 of the Maitreya Buddhas, and they all seem like very amazing, high, beautiful people. And I didn't have any ability to understand, but when they taught, it was like one voice. They spoke the voice of who they said that they were the Tolku. Same for Vajrayogini, same for Manjushri, same for the Maitreya. So these beings who, as we would call it in the model age, and now if you say this in an anthroposophic room, you will clear the room immediately. The word channel, because of all the fake channels in America, right? But there are people who can channel this stuff, like these nonverbal autistic children. Ask them a question, they go to their place, they talk to the being themselves. Now, Steiner said you can do this in the Akashic records, but don't expect it to be that being in modern time. So if I want to talk to Aristotle, I can go talk to Aristotle of the past. And I can even enter into his thought and even understand things that he never wrote down. So it isn't that I read his works and I grokked them. I totally understood them. No. It's that you can literally talk to this being in the past and ask them questions, and they will give you answers from the past, but they won't give you their current answers. And so this creates quite an incongruency in the way that you might experience these things. So anyone we mention here on this list doesn't mean that they're going to be that in this incarnation, or that we should go find their works now. They may have they call it backsliding. They may have gone back a couple steps. You never know. Anyone can go forward or backward at their own speed. So we can't say, but I can tell you that when you look at these people, if you go to certain documents, some documents, no. Other documents, you go, whoa, that's inspired. That's amazing. And when you listen to these Tolkus, or these people who say that they are the inspiration of these things, so this also leads to a lot of people in the psych ward who say that they're Jesus Christ or whoever, and they may not be. I'm not saying those people are really channeling that. All I'm saying is that there are many people who could, but even the people who do, and we can give examples that aren't on this list, because there's a lot of other anthroposophic examples that aren't on this list. Like take, for example, Johann Valentin Andreas. He didn't know that he was being inspired, and he wrote something that helped start the Rosicrucian movement. Later, he said it was a ludubrium. It was a play. It was just something he was just horsing around with. Well, you can be inspired by a being. You can even have evil people doing good. And so we're not saying that we're rubber stamping any of this or that we should look for these people now. What we're saying is this gives you a hint of how Christianity was spread, because these people, when they spoke through their inspiration of these perfected vehicles, people were deeply moved and they had a direct encounter of Christ, whether in the etheric or through that person. It doesn't matter. And that's what you have to have while you're incarnated on the earth. You cannot attain that after you die, in the time between death and the next birth. You must attain a relationship that is personal. Now, that sounds like a fundamentalist kind of thing. No, it is not. You must understand that Christ permeates all aspect of nature. That's why we went from being an entropic to a non-entropic or ectropic, a growing. We went from gravity into death to levity into life. And so we have to understand that Christ is in all aspects of nature too. And as we're looking at that, we have to see the life in it. And so we have to find now people who might be channeling, inspired by, overlighted by, or receiving, as Steiner called, the wax imprint of the perfected vehicle of someone in the spiritual realm.
Yes, that's an important consideration, because it's not always happening in the same way. So it can be very, very confusing when you begin to study it, because you have individuals that are actually incarnating with a perfected vehicle from specifically Christ, or from one of the saints, or one of their previous incarnations. But also you have events that occur where somebody begins to receive an inspiration, perhaps from a Nirmanakaya, or one of those perfected vehicles. Within Tibetan Buddhism, they talk about the Nirmanakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Dharmakaya. Well, the Nirmanakaya is the transformed astral body. The Nirmanakaya is the transformed astral body. The Dharmakaya is the transformed etheric body, and the Sambhogakaya is the transformation of yet a higher up vehicle than that. So it's a transformation actually occurring that has a impact on the physical world, so that you have these profound transformations that can happen within what are called the kayas, or the rupas, the forms in theosophical terminology. And when one encounters these things, it can bring one into relationship to the corresponding angelic realms. So, for example, if you come into relationship with the transformed astral body, that's the realm of the angels, and the transformed etheric is the realm of the archangels, and the transformed of the physical is the actual archai, or time spirits. Now, that just sounds like a bunch of jargon to most people, because they don't have some kind of abstract category filing system set up to be able to relate to a lot of the language that we use. And that's okay, because this is something that happens gradually. And the path of the Grail is gradualis, which means gradually. So if you can even take some small portion of what we're working with here and introduce it into your daily thought process, you find that it will give you results. And it's something that happens actually more readily with musicians. And you'll see musicians, I've seen several of the leading pianists, for example, come up with how they feel about playing their music. And they feel as if it's visited upon them, that it's something that has an existence outside of them that is now working through them. And it's really quite profound. And Goethe made reference to that, but he also made reference that it happens to artists too, but it's more common amongst musicians. And he gives the examples, of course, of Mozart and Beethoven and so on and so forth. Of course, within the realm of the arts, the primary example given within spiritual science is Raphael Sanzio, the great painter who died at age 37 and is responsible for so many wonderful images of Madonna and scenes from scripture. And it's unending. Just this morning, I was looking at a drawing that he did, a self-portrait, when he was 16 years old. I mean, the level at which certain individuals can operate is so profound that just to come into relationship to that is a transformative experience.
So true. And they used to call them the muses. And, usually they'd have one or two muses that you worked with who literally embodied before the person and was inspiring them. So for me, it's Sophia. And when I'm looking at the Greek gods, what I think of is Dr. Tyler Gabriel's book, trilogy called The Gospel of Sophia, where there's a path to go through the 12 stages that the heroine, in this case, goes through, like Psyche went through, until they are perfected and raised into the stars. This is really the path that we're talking about here. Is you don't just wait around for one of the other perfected vehicles. You go on the path of initiation, which is like Heracles, the 12 labors, or actually the labors of Psyche. And so in this book, there is an initiation process, and this initiation process tunes you into the 12 faces of the goddess, because until you're all 12 faces and you can see from 12 different points of view, you don't have a true view unless you are just inspired and it comes through you, like Johann Valentin Andreas. He just wrote it. There's been things I've written that later I read them, I go, I had nothing to do with that. I don't know how that happened. I didn't do that. And that's what happens sometimes, you're inspired, but that's different than the path that goes from the 12 faces, or the 12 perspectives, the 12 worldviews, to the 7 pillars in the temple of wisdom. And that's where some of these children are. And why are they in the pillars? Those are pillars of virtue. And you must develop these virtues before you go to the next stages of 5, 3, 2, 1. But the point is that some of these non-verbal autistic children are savants. They're geniuses. Why? Because they're still enwrapped in the wings of Christ. They haven't reached standing upright, speaking, and thinking. So just because you're inspired, and the works that I've read of theirs are like, give me shivers. It's like the best thing I can ever put down on paper would be what I'm reading, they put down on paper. They type it. Or that they could go and get any wisdom, go talk to anybody from the past, go get whatever wisdom but they, why? They also know that what the material world really is. So it's an amazing thing that there's a place you can go to. So these people who were inspired or embodied by these perfected vehicles could be, let's say I decide I want to be a Franciscan. And I've known Franciscans like this. They never wore shoes. And they could run across glass, and they tried to be like Francis, or in the early days of Christianity, they tried to do what Thomas Kempis said in The Imitation of Christ. Imitate Christ. And so what we're talking about here is when we were talking in the first video about the perfected vehicle that's the template of the human being going through this big process of development. These people who receive these gifts could just be for a moment. They could just be to carry something into history that changed history. Or it could be that they were trying to emulate something and they perfected it. But I can tell you that if you had read Steiner's, what is it, Mysticism in the Modern Age, and it had a few names, right? But you read about these mystics from the past, I'm like, yeah, these are my guys. I want to be a hermit. I want to run off and do what Meister Eckhart did, and then come back and be like Johannes Tauler, who spoke after the Master Jesus came and spoke with him and said, no, man, you need to work on your voice, go, don't talk for a long time, then come back. When he came back, he spoke, people fainted, and I'm like, yeah, I want to be a priest like that. I want to go out and I want to give sermons. No, this isn't what we're saying. Don't try to emulate what you think these people are. That's not the point. They at one moment were playing an instrument in the orchestra of heaven. They weren't the director. Okay. So but when, John and I have studied these people to the point where you go, there's no one on this list that I haven't deeply studied. And, I did not go back and read Steiner and make a list of who should be on the list. But why? Because there's the voice of, I was going to say higher reason, higher love speaking through them. And so, yes, at certain times, these people like St. Francis, don't put him in charge of, the committee on something. No, he's not going to show up. But will he go build a church out of bricks, out of stones in the area, barefoot until his hands are bleeding, and and not eat during that time because he's fasting? Yeah. So should you do that? Not necessarily. So if you want a perfected vehicle, you first have to go the first stage. And this is what I want to clarify. This is not easy peasy street. This isn't, hey, I think I'll dial this up and channel this today. Though there are people like that. I know terrible people like that, myself included, who in the early days, I would say, I can channel anything. What do you want me to channel? I once channeled Barbie, and I got it right. And that's how easy it is to channel. Channel doesn't mean nothing. What means something is if you morally were changed in the process of the morality that flowed through you, if you were doing something moral. And that's what happened with these people. So were they perfected? No. And was what they wrote the thing? Let's take Thomas Aquinas is on this list. We'll go there in a minute. But the point is that he was used for the Inquisition. Very spiritual guy. He levitated. His works were, defended the Catholic Church for how long? I don't know, centuries. And yet they wanted to burn him at the last. He was headed to an Inquisition where they were going to burn him. He hit his head, fell over, and Reginald of Pimpernel took him to the nearest monastery, and he died. So at one moment he's inspired, and at the next moment he doesn't know where he is, and he gets hit in the head with a limb because he's not watching out. So these things aren't as simple as some people in spiritual movements make it. For instance, there's one lady who will tell you that she's every single important female in history reincarnated. Every one of them. No, I was Nefertiti. It's like, no, that's not the point. If you were Nefertiti, get over yourself and move on. But in some cases, which is in this book, you have Copernicus and Nicholas of Cusa, right? Well, they're kind of sharing back and forth. Because why? Their brains are like, they're, what do they call it? Quantum entanglement. That's really plasma. But anyway, it's like John and I. If I dropped over, John would go, oh, it's okay, I can finish that. This is what he would have said. Why? Because we think alike, and we've been working now for 40 years or however long it's been, 50, who knows. And so certain people start to think alike. Well, this is what we're talking about. And so in these traditions of like Tibetan Buddhism, where somebody's the reincarnated Dalai Lama, what is that? It's a memory stream, isn't it? And they literally take on the capacity either of their supposed previous reincarnations and or the great being's mind and heart and actions, and they can carry the work forward. And that's what it's all about. It's all about saying, we're only telling you this, that there's 7 deeds of Christ, so that you know what the future is, because then you know you're eternal, and you have help, tremendous help along the way. But we're showing you what happens when you tap into the perfected vehicles. By the way, I still will probably go there. I shouldn't, but I will. That when you tap into these perfected vehicles, that in fact, they're there for everyone. It's not personal. If you take it personal and come back and say, well, I am now so-and-so reincarnated because I tapped that into that in the spiritual, in the realm of spiritual economy, or Shambhala, or Mount Meru, or there's 1,000 names for it. And I brought it back. Well, what I did notice is when those children went and talked to great spiritual wisdom beings, and then they come back, they were humble. Few words, unlike me. Few words, just boom, as they call it, brutal truth. I'm like, yeah, that's brutal truth. I like that, but most people don't like that. Or blatant truth. It just, boom, it just hits you and you go, oh, you can't argue with that.
Well, that brings up an important point, because you have there an example of the wisdom stream, that is that when you look to the past, you have the wisdom, so that every day you're surrounded by these great majestic acts of nature. What is that? That's an embodiment of the wisdom of the divine spiritual beings. But what is your mission? Is it to just contemplate the beauty of the majestic creations of nature? No, you're supposed to go a step further. And so you have to take that cosmos of wisdom, as Rudolf Steiner calls it, and transform it into a cosmos of love. And if there's any word that people had the wildest notions about, it's that word right there, love, which, if you look at it closely, you realize it's actually a verb. And so it has to do with something that you're going to do. Now, whether or not you're doing it, actually, well, that's another matter. So you can look at that word as a verb and see how many acts of love have I performed today, okay? And not as a means of aggrandizement, that you're not trying to go, hey, look at me, I'm this wonderful, loving being, because that's kind of like diametrically the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. It's more like the humility of these young people that Douglas is talking about. But they don't have that love element yet, unless if you get your Down syndrome children, they do. See, so they have that element, but they don't have the wisdom. They can't explain to you the principles of deep space, for example, but they can sure make you happy. So it's like this wonderful mosaic of human capacities that is all drawn together, and in which, through spiritual economy, you can be able to explore the various facets of this wisdom and love stream. And so you have this sevenfold process that you're going through. There's 7 times 7 times 7, which is the 343 embodiments of the earth. And through those 343 embodiments, you go through all the various stages of human evolution, and you attempt to try and understand that process coming from 12 different vantage points. Hopefully, if you can bring that to fruition, then you will be able to move into the space where the 13th exists, and that's the Christ, see? And it's important to understand that Christianity is not a religion, okay? It's a being. Christ is a living being who can participate intimately in your life, more intimately than you can. And so it behooves one to develop the wonder, awe, and reverence to be able to approach such a lofty subject.
Well said. As a child, all I wanted to do was go to church and be surrounded by that love and people doing sacred, sacramental things, worshiping it through, these rituals and stuff and beautiful words. And yeah, we can still do that. And that's up to us. And we can have that experience, but we must do it all anew. We're a church of one now. We are our own North Star, and we must find our own way. And the way is love. And so through the wisdom of Sophia, we get the love of Christ. And Rudolf Steiner said, I've been studying astronomy and astrophysics and plasma and all this stuff, the etheric formative forces. And what he says at the end is very clear. What you need to first understand is that the universe is completely, some fantastic word, completely and absolutely filled with nothing but divine love. And so I started studying that. All of atomism, and with scientism, spiritual science and materialism merged together, and or spiritual materialism, says that all there is the strong and weak nuclear force, in other words, the nonsense of atoms, and gravity. And basically, they're going to say that both of those run on what? Positive and negative. So I said in the last talk, the whole universe is sex. It's negative and positive particles that haven't come together. They're proto-particles. And when they do, they can either be neutral and you live together for 70 years, or they can explode and you go your different ways, or they can merge and you can create out of nothingness. You can create babies. That's the whole thing. There's really nothing else. And when you break it down, they'll give you all the numbers, and that's all fake. That's taking, the 1%, less than 1% of the earth and projecting it on the universe. But when you do, then you start to do things like this. Silly people like Robert Temple come along in the new book, a book that's now been put out called The New Heaven. Is that what it's called? The New Heaven? A Vision of the New Heaven or something like that. And it's talking about plasma, and he makes plasma into God. And he says that the realm of spiritual economy, essentially, he doesn't call it that, but he says where all the archetypes live and all the memory lives are the Kordylowski clouds, these plasma clouds, but next to the moon, in the moon's orbit. Or that these plasmoids come out of the plasmosphere and into the thermosphere, and then they come down to Earth, and they're angels. Technically, they're angelic hosts. Those are the chariots of the thrones, the cherubim and the seraphim, the beings of love, balance, and willpower. But when it comes down to that, that's a vehicle. That's like the vehicle of lightning. Lightning, Rudolf Steiner says, is the flaming sword of the cherubim. And he says that electricity is created by plasma, not the other way around. Plasma creates electricity, not electricity creates plasma. So to begin with, he says there's a polarity between plasma and the etheric formative forces. And until you know that, you don't know anything. And so you got people on one side fighting for an electric universe and atomism and gravity, and on the other side fighting for the etheric formative forces and not acknowledging plasma. So what is happening here now is that you must do not what these people from the past did. Now, you don't go back and make a religion of all these people who channeled Christ, as it were, in many cases, for one bodily aspect or another. But you actually take it the next step and you find out that they're really, look at the solar breath, the solar wind, and look at the wings of Christ around us, because that's what's really going on. So it doesn't matter that they say that there's material substance for spiritual working. No, the etheric realm is an invisible, non-physical realm. Is plasma is mostly invisible, but sometimes is physical. They're not the same. One is a vehicle. The other one is the spirit. One is the form. The other one is the function. One is a being, and the other one is an inorganic entity following electromagnetic principles. So as you work with this, you go, oh, okay. Again, it is such a mystery, but all we need to know is that the being of the sun worked all this out long before we got here. And that if we'd stop trying to name a new Gabriel theory, this is the Gabriel theory, because I found it. I discovered these forces. Really, you discovered them? No, that's nonsense. What happens if we humble ourselves like every person on this list? They humbled themselves. So let's start off with the list. From the time of Christ until the 5th to 6th century, what happened? Well, first off, the disciples went around and most of them got, horribly tortured, hung upside down, terribly martyred, and just killed. And yet to their last breath, they were saying, this is real. I'm telling you, it's real. I saw him raised from the dead and you're eternal too. And they're going, yeah, kill him. Oh, he didn't die. Well, boil him. Okay, now cut him up. Now, what was it? Saint Fernarius, they did it to 12 different things to try to kill him, and still couldn't kill him, because that's what they did to martyrs. We're going to kill him until he admits something different. No, this is the real thing. These are people who are willing to die for what they witnessed, just like Paul was willing to die for the fact that he witnessed Jesus of Nazareth raised into a spiritual realm that appeared to him, but only after he was knocked off his horse and blind. And I said deaf one day, but he wasn't deaf, because Ananias had to come and teach him. And then he came back to himself, and he realized that he had seen an angel, and he looked through his desire body, became less selfish, and saw the etheric Christ. And he said, that's it. I'm never going back. I'm going to tell the whole world about this. And he became probably one of the best apostles. So he went out, he did his thing. They wrote some things down, but mostly it was like, long afterwards. But what they had was what? The relics, the blood relics. So would they have thrown away the cup used at the Last Supper? Would they have thrown away the spear of Longinus? Would they have thrown away the shroud? Would they have thrown away the thorns? Would they have thrown away anything that touched the blood of Christ? Of course they wouldn't have. So no matter what anyone says, beyond a shadow of a doubt, they kept some of that stuff, and it became a relic. It touched other things like it, and they became second-tier relics, third-tier relics, and now in the Catholic Church, you can't say Mass unless you have a relic, the bones of a saint, or of Mary's robe, or the wood of the cross, or whatever. But that doesn't matter. That's belief, and that's the point. That the people believed it so much they'd go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, or to Santiago de Compostela, or whatever. They would give up their lives. People died on these pilgrimages all the time so that they could go to a place to touch a relic. So for the first, 500 years or so, that's what really ruled the church. And so he doesn't really mention too many people there in that time, because anyone who came in contact with Christ would be affected that way. But when he goes to the 6th century to the 10th, he mentions the following. And John, jump in after this. I'm just going to name them. St. Augustine, St. Patrick, St. Columbanus, or Columbus, we call him usually, St. Gallas, John Scotus Erigena, who you're always raving about, and Galileo Galilei. These people had what he said was Christ woven into the etheric bodies of leading Christians, and they led the way. So in fact, Christ did not leave us. He was working from the realm of spiritual economy through these people for these 500 years. And these people, if you think about their lives, you'll see these are, in most cases, astoundingly humble people who put their life on the line for what it is that they directly experienced.
It really is a wonderful adventure to explore the minds and hearts of these great individuals, and try to come to an understanding of what the distinctions are between the gifts that they received through receiving these perfected vehicles from Christ, as Rudolf Steiner refers it to, or if there are those that have received the perfected vehicles of saints and what have you, or even their own vehicles that they worked on in previous incarnations, and that led them to become what are known in the schools of initiation in the West, the homeless souls. Those individuals that realize that they're eternal, and that they could be in a better situation than they are right now, but for the time being, they're down here, and they're here to labor in the vineyard of the Lord. And so that's basically what we're talking about. Okay, now that you're down here, okay, well, you still got to chop wood and carry water. You still have to do all this day-to-day stuff and live your existence. And so Rudolf Steiner realized that not everybody could successfully accomplish the goal of becoming like a monk, and go into a priory and renounce the world and do all these otherworldly exercises. And so it came about that it was deemed in like the 3rd, 4th century, there was a meeting that took place between some of the leaders of mankind. and Mane, Scythianos, and the Nirmanakaya, the Buddha, and they determined that it was necessary that there be a path that was more accessible for the average individual who had daily chores and family and all these responsibilities to deal with. What were they supposed to do? They couldn't go be a monk. So leading up to that time, people could go to Mass on Sunday, and there was, of course, services during the week and all of that. But to be able to integrate themselves more completely into the Christian impulse, the Christ impulse, as Rudolf Steiner refers to it on many occasions, is that Rosicrucian path. And that within the path of Rosicrucianism, it was initially set down through the inspirational writings of the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz and the Fame and Confession of the Rosicrucians, and these early seminal writings by Johann Valentin Andreas, who later in life, he basically disowned them and said that they were just a ludubrium, that it was a joke. So it was something that he couldn't have written on his own. Just like what Rudolf Steiner says about Isis Unveiled. He says, if you read Isis Unveiled, especially the first part, it's very clear that she could have never done this on her own. So what does that mean? So she must have had help. And so there are these great leaders of mankind that are available to those who take these things seriously and can be very, very helpful in one's individual path of self-development and growth. And so it's good just to keep your mind open that there are many things in this world that one can avail oneself of, and that these divine spiritual beings that we participate with, they would like nothing better than to see us succeed.
So true. When I look at this list, Augustine, Patrick, Columba, Gallus, Erigena, Galileo, these were people who were brave. In some cases, they were connected a lot with pagans beforehand, and then all of a sudden they had a conversion, and then they had better insight. Matter of fact, Steiner points out that the Christians from the island of Ireland, in many cases, went east. They took Christianity east before Christianity came west. And so what we have here, merging with the relics and the people who knew Christ, and then during this age, you start to see, of course, the Holy Grail come forward, and he talked about the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail. And in the next period, the third period, from the 10th to the 16th century, they literally have the Grail lore being written down. Well, what is the Grail lore? It's about a blood relics, or blood having the secret of spirit, and so on and so forth. Well, these people had that, but they had it to the point that they didn't need anything. Like a St. Patrick couldn't be stopped. Nothing could stop him. And he went from the west to the east, and they were the missionaries. They were actually more Christian than the Christians in many cases. And so these people are very, very, very powerful Christian leaders who developed Christianity further and basically showed by their life that they were willing to sacrifice their life for what they directly experienced. This isn't a teaching. This is a direct experience. So in the third period, Steiner talks about from the 10th to the 16th century, Christ was woven into the astral body of leading Christians. So he mentions the following. He mentions the man who wrote the Heliad in Saxon, and then he writes about Tom having the astral body of Christ and interwoven into their astral body. So this Saxon who wrote the Heliad, and it's a very amazing story. You go back and read it. I don't want to go into it now, but you have St. Francis of Assisi, Elizabeth von Turgen, who is an amazing person, St. Thomas Aquinas, they called him the Angelic Doctor, Meister Eckhart, one of my favorite people. The words he says are just like, thank you, that's so helpful. I should do that right away. And then Johannes Tauler wrote a whole alphabet of morality that I've used for years. I recited it every day. Each letter of the alphabet has a little phrase which reminds you how to be moral. And it's just so powerful. I can't begin to tell you that. I think in some of the books, there's multiple copies of it in different translations. So Johannes Tauler he met the friend of God from the Highland. and Nicholas Kusana, who later he laid down a lot of the work for astronomy that was later picked up. So you have some of these giants of their age, Francis Assisi, Thomas Aquinas, Meister Eckhart, Johannes Tauler. These are very influential people of their time. And when they wrote, I'm telling you, I had to be very selective about what I put in the book because they write so many amazing things that, you have to stop somewhere. But I recommend but when you do, you need to think about the fact that the Francis of Assisi was, so to speak, the sentient soul of Jesus Nazareth, the next category. Instead of astral body, he's in the sentient body. So he mixes a bit of that. Thomas Aquinas has the intellectual soul. The consciousness soul is in Meister Eckhart and Thomas and Johannes Tauler. So though when we say astral body, they may have specific qualities of either the sentient soul, intellectual soul, or the consciousness soul. And when you look at that, you go, yeah, that is so true. They are speaking out of their own time. So I'm not saying that every word they say is 100% correct for our time. But what I am saying is that they were absolutely Christian development of their own time. And their attitudes and their development basically guided the entire group soul of Christianity, if there is such a thing, into the future with the words that they said. So these people with the astral body, as you look at them, well, they had to tame their desires. Did Francis Assisi tame his desires? Yes. Thomas Aquinas? Yes. Meister Eckhart Tolle? Yes. Have most people tamed their astral body? No. So good luck with that. But can you tame your sentient body or your intellectual soul or your consciousness soul? Maybe sometimes you can be inspired by those powerfully perfected vehicles of Christ, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll hold it for very long or that you are the perfect embodiment of that. So we have to look at everybody. All of these people did have their faults too. And when you look at them, you say, okay, it helped perfect them over time. And so your faults are something that should be your friend, and you should use it to perfect yourself. So, John, I mentioned a whole lot of people. I'm just going to mention the last one too, because then you can talk about anybody you want. From the 16th century on, he just mentions in this particular reference I'm looking at, there are others, and he says many people will have the I am of Christ, or a mimic of it, a bit of it. It doesn't mean that they're perfect in any way. But he says that Christian Rosenkreuz. Now, we're talking to an expert here, John Barnwell, about Christian Rosenkreuz, the Comte de Saint Germain, and the whole many incarnations, which will be coming out in a book, 2 books from now, that we're working on. And what will happen here is that you will see that this being who holds that distinction of the one person Steiner mentioned is so powerful, so amazing, that once you understand all these incarnations of this being, you will be totally humbled, and in fact, it'll be one of the great lessons of your life. So all these people, they're inspired from different aspects of Christ, and we wanted to make sure that people realize that Christ hasn't left us. His teaching may not be found except a verbal, a mouth-to-ear teaching with the apostles. And even the apostles, maybe they didn't write it down, doesn't matter. They still spread it to the people they contacted. The relics have spread. The church has spread. The teaching has spread. And these great thinkers have spread it even further. And so if you really want to be in tune with the advanced teaching, you probably want to look at Christian Rosenkreuz and Rosicrucianism.
Yes, and just to kind of clarify some of that, in the lecture, a collection of lectures, the Principles of Spiritual Economy, Lecture 8. It was Sunday, April 11th, 1909. Rudolf Steiner says, in addition to the copies of the etheric and the astral body of Jesus of Nazareth, countless copies of his eye were preserved for posterity as well. His eye had disappeared from the 3 sheaths when Christ moved into them. But a copy of this eye, heightened through the Christ event, remained and was multiplied into an infinite number of copies. We have in this copy of the eye of Jesus of Nazareth something that is still present today in the spiritual world, and human beings who have made themselves mature enough can find it, and with it, the splendor of the Christ force and of the Christ impulse that carries within it. And so with that, there's not much more that one needs to know. I mean, it's a wonderful journey, and I've said time and time again that if it wasn't for Rudolf Steiner, I really don't know what I would have done down here. I don't know, maybe I would have studied Advaita Vedanta or something, but I did study all that, you know, and it's important to realize that there's a very unique impulse that comes through the Christian stream, because if you get into, like what I mentioned, Advaita Vedanta and the early Eastern teachings, there's really no sense of time. There's a recapitulation, but it's a recapitulation as repetition. Whereas within Christianity, you'll find that there's a recapitulation with a metamorphosis, and that we're getting better and better all the time.